Click that subscribe button to never miss another scary story. If you are subscribed, click the notification bell and click the like button. Thank you. Do you ever feel things that aren't there? Get an itch but can't find where to scratch? Sometimes your life hangs on the line. So, what will you do when you feel the drip? You're watching Darkness Prevails, the best place to share your creepy stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. Author Jorabu from Reddit's Nosleep forum shares a curiously terrifying creepypasta with us today. They explain the events that followed when she began to feel the drip. Nearly my whole life, I had a frequent, strange occurrence. It wasn't until recently that I discovered the cause. I'll try my best to recount these events as precisely and coherently as I can. I remember the first time it happened. I was sitting in my 7th grade history class, idly twirling a strand of hair while Mr. Robinson was writing on the whiteboard. I felt a tiny drop on my shoulder, so small that if I had actually been paying attention in class, I would have never noticed it. I instinctively put my hand on my shoulder to wipe away the wetness, but to my surprise, it was dry. I glanced up at the ceiling, expecting to see a leak. Nothing. I made a quick turn and looked behind me. There was nothing other than an empty desk. Years passed, and I never gave that incident another thought, until it happened again. I was perched up on my bathroom counter, both knees on opposite sides of the sink, examining my face for any blemishes, and it happened. The drop hit my shoulder, the same spot, with no evidence it was ever there. Not a tiny speckle of water was on my shoulder. It was completely dry. I had told my mom about the strange event that just took place. She simply glanced up from the book she was reading, took one look at my face, and said, "Honey, what have I told you about picking at your face? You're as red as a tomato. You'll grow out of pimples, but you can't grow out of scars." She was right. The pimples went away as I got older, but the dripping never did. It wasn't frequent. I'd feel the familiar drop every 2 or 3 years, just enough so I could never think I'd made it up. I'd learned to drive, gotten a dog, gotten married, bought a home, and had 2 children, all the while the drops kept falling on my shoulder. It was never a problem, mostly just a mild inconvenience I'd assumed was a side effect of stress. But eventually things got worse. I was sitting at work when I felt the drop. I rubbed my shoulder out of habit, then felt another drop pass straight through my hand and land on my shoulder. It had never happened twice before. I found myself glancing up at the ceiling knowing that nothing would be there. After that day, the drops became a monthly occurrence, then weekly, then daily. I was going to doctors on all types of medicine and still, nothing changed. My husband, Todd, grew more concerned with every day that passed. Thud. "Well, it's real to her. I want solutions, not theories, not sympathy, no more pills. Solutions." I grabbed Todd's clenched up fist off the table. His knuckles were white with the force he landed them with. "Please, Dr. Shannon, I assure you, I'm not making this up." The doctor sighed. "I understand, but we've tried countless treatments. We've exhausted every option." I could see Todd's jaw clenching up. I breathed in deeply, trying to maintain the peace. "Is there anything else we can try?" I could hear the pleading in my own voice. The constant dripping was driving me crazy. I just wanted it to stop. The doctor crossed her legs and sat up. "Well, we do have a few more options, but you have to understand that with these things there are certain..." She stopped mid-sentence, mouth still slightly agape, eyes still focused on mine. Dr. Shannon." The edges of her lips began to twitch. A small gurgling sound was coming out of her mouth from somewhere deep in her throat. Something about it was inherently wrong, unnatural. Her pupils dilated as she slowly raised her hand and pointed a finger at me. I sat there frozen, horrified by what I was seeing, but unable to look away. "What the?" Todd muttered under his breath as he opened the door to the hallway and called for help. Dr. Shannon's eyes rolled to the back of her head as she continued to point at me, the gurgling sound becoming louder, angrier. Another doctor walked into the room and quickly made his way to her. Just as he reached her, she began speaking very quietly, repeating the same thing over and over, voice still gurgling, finger still pointing.
Duermete, niño, duermete ya, que viene el lobo, y te llevará.
Todd shook his head as we made our way down the hallway towards the exit. These doctors are idiots. I mean, really. She had the audacity to call you crazy when she's clearly the one with the issues. I normally would have laughed, but instead I placed my shaking hand in his. My mother used to sing that lullaby to me. Todd looked down at me. You mean that crap she was saying? I nodded slowly. It's a song, meant to scare children to sleep. If they stay awake, the Lobo will get them. Lobo? It means wolf. Todd let out a small chuckle as we reached the exit. I wished for a moment I could be as unfazed as he was, but something felt wrong deep in my gut. I felt the rain as soon as we stepped outside. The hell? I moaned as I fumbled around in my bag, looking for my umbrella. I could feel my clothes already getting damp. I thought we were in for a sunny weekend. I snapped open the umbrella and caught Todd giving me a strange look. Maria, it's not raining. I laughed a little before I realized he was serious. I outstretched my arm and saw it was dry. No, I can feel it everywhere, Todd. He gave me a sad look, full of pity I didn't want. I can feel it. Even the umbrella was no help. The drops were all over me. I slapped my arm, slapped my leg, slapped every bit of skin I could see, but the drips didn't stop. It was too much to handle. I broke down in tears, collapsing to my knees as Todd dropped down to cradle my head in his arms. I just wanted to stop, I sobbed. Todd rubbed my back gently, quietly whispering next to my head. What's wrong with me? I cried into his shoulder for what felt like hours. After I had calmed down, I wiped the tears and snot from my face. I'm sorry, I sniffled. Todd whispered something just quietly enough that I couldn't quite hear it. What? I asked as I pulled back to get a look at his face. His eyes were white, and he was pointing at me, whispering. Todd, stop it. I pulled myself out of his arms, but he just sat there frozen, whispering quietly. This isn't funny, Todd. He didn't even blink. I leaned in to hear what he was saying. He was repeating just one word. Lobo. My heart skipped a beat. The world fell silent. Todd sat there quietly, still pointing, and in a moment of horror, I realized he wasn't pointing at me. He was pointing behind me. I gathered every bit of courage I had and turned around. I vomited when I saw him. He was darker than the night sky and stood nearly 9 feet tall. His arms stretched out twice that length, with faces filling in every twist and turn. Faces full of anger, hate, despair, and agony. Faces that deformed, rotted, and then reincarnated right before my eyes. Out of all the faces, his was the worst. It was as if he'd found a wolf, cut off its face, and plastered it onto his. He reeked of death and decay. Something deep within me knew that this was an ancient being. It was instinct. Every fiber of my being was screaming for me to get away. He reached out towards me, and I sat there frozen in fear as his arms tripled in length. I knew I should have ran, should have screamed, should have done anything. But all I could focus on was the face at the tip of his right arm. My face, twisted in a million different ways. What happened next was a blur. I wish I could say I remember how I got away, if I got away, but I don't. I just remember suddenly being held in my mother's arms, and I'm ashamed to say I punched her. She forgave me, of course, being in the state of fear and confusion I was in. I remember the doctor muttering how unbelievable this was under his breath. I remember countless tests, but I'll never remember anything quite as vividly as I remember him. My name is Maria Avila. I'm 13 years old. I was in a coma for 4 months. A leak saved my life. A leak right above my shoulder that had only been dripping for 12 minutes. The doctors called it a miracle. After hearing my story, my mom claims it was her lullaby that woke me. I had imagined 30 years of my life, of my husband, my children, all of it, in 12 small minutes. I'm here to warn you, if you ever feel a drip you can't explain, or perhaps a small breeze no one else can feel, wake up. The Lobo is lurking, and he's itching to gain a new face.